Venezuela has initiated criminal proceedings against the individuals involved in the seizing of its gold reserves. Russia has rejected any attempt at foreign interference following its referendum on constitutional amendments. A second wave of locusts threatens to consume East African crops, sparking fears over food shortages. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. And we begin in Venezuela, where Attorney General Tariq William Saab announced that his office had initiated criminal proceedings against those directly implicated in the theft of Venezuela's gold reserves deposited in the Bank of England. During a press conference on Friday, the Attorney General noted that the prosecutor's office had called on the competent court to issue an arrest warrant and freeze the assets of those citizens who make up the criminal group that awarded themselves the right to illegally represent Venezuela internationally. The Attorney General mentioned several individuals, including Ricardo Adolfo Villamil, Giacomo Cudish Cortesia, Manuel Rodriguez Amesta, and many others, all members of the so-called ad hoc board of directors of the Central Bank of Venezuela, the illegitimate body appointed by opposition lawmaker Juan Guaido. And a Venezuelan Attorney General stressed that the theft of Venezuela's gold is part of the strategy of the United States and its allies to take control of the country's assets.
That was the excuse to create a parapet of a fictitious government called interim. All these stupid adjectives. That was the excuse that the government of the United States of America and the Donald Trump administration found, together with it, stooges in the European Union, to plunder Venezuela's resources, its wealth, its assets held abroad, and simply commit a theft from the people of Venezuela. That was the excuse. To all these criminals who acted in favor of the interest of foreign powers, who have conspired to make our people suffer amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, amidst the well-known searching for supplies given a scarcity of food, medicines and gasoline, and who haven't reached themselves by attacking the country, are accused of the crimes of treason against the homeland, usurpation of functions, and criminal association.
Venezuela's ambassador to the United Nations office in Geneva, Jorge Valero, rejected the update of the report on Venezuela presented on Thursday by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet. The ambassador stressed that the report includes information of limited credibility without having been duly contrasted with the Venezuelan authorities. He added that the report also excluded the major achievements reached in the national dialogue between the Venezuelan government and opposition parties. Venezuela's ambassador also said that since the last report presented by Commissioner Bachelet, the government of Donald Trump has tightened its blockade against the South American nation, imposing new unilateral and coercive sanctions that harm the Venezuelan people in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonsalves, assumed the chairmanship of the Caribbean community for the next 6 months on Friday, in a context marked by the COVID-19 pandemic in the region. Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, handed over the responsibility in the 20th special meeting of CARICOM heads held via video conference. According to the Puebla Group, with the new presidency, the region will assume responsibility for integration, solidarity and resilience in times of necessary leadership to address the current health, economic, social, environmental and political crisis. The virtual meeting analysed issues of great impact for the region, such as the joint response to the COVID-19 pandemic, with more than 8,300 cases reported among CARICOM member states.
If ever there was a time that we understood the importance of these regional institutions, it is now. Every day, countries across this region can manage who comes in and out of their borders with the assistance of impacts. Impacts has made a difference from Bahamas in the north to Guyana and Suriname in the south, from Barbados in the east to Belize in the west. It has allowed us to help screening and to be able to deal with what none of us ever contemplated would be our reality. Closed borders not only to the international community, but to each other.
CARICOM has chalked up impressive achievements in its 4 pillars of integration: functional cooperation, coordination of foreign policy, security collaboration, and economic integration, including single market trading arrangements. In the early days of COVID-19, our colleague, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley of Trinidad and Tobago, perhaps with only a touch of hyperbole, affirmed that, quote, CARICOM is the antidote to COVID-19, unquote.
Chile saw further protests against the handling of the COVID-19 health emergency by President Sebastián Piñera this Thursday. Once again, protesters were harshly repressed by police, special forces and military troops. In the context of the commemoration of the popular uprising against the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet, numerous communities from low-income neighborhoods of the capital took to the streets to protest the alarming numbers of COVID-19 cases in Chile, a situation sparked by the mismanagement of the crisis by the Piñera government. Protesters also reject the way in which different organisations and agencies have used the pandemic to establish political and social control mechanisms. The scenes of police brutality were repeated throughout the night and part of Friday morning, with many protesters detained. Also on Thursday night, military personnel in Santiago's neighbourhood of Villa Francia detained volunteers working in a soup kitchen, which forms part of a group of organisations known as Olla Común, which deliver food to more than 500 residents struggling in the midst of the economic crisis. With less than 1,000 registered novel coronavirus cases and just 27 deaths, Uruguay is a notable exception in a region that has become the epicenter of the global health crisis. While its land borders with Argentina and Brazil will remain closed, the country is preparing to resume international air travel from certain countries. Uruguay currently has just 83 active cases, while its giant neighbor Brazil is the world's worst-hit country after the United States. This success is especially remarkable as there never was an official lockdown imposed in the country. And we're taking a very short break now, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Russia has rejected any attempt at foreign interference following its referendum on constitutional amendments. Referring to the referendum that concluded on Wednesday after 7 days of voting, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that Moscow was well aware of the concerns expressed abroad regarding the constitutional amendments, but it's not willing to negotiate them. Peskov reiterated Russia's right to act with self-determination. The official highlighted that Russia will always respect international law and at the same time will continue being faithful to its own sovereignty. And Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a decree on Friday to enact the constitutional amendments approved by the majority of Russians in a week-long nationwide vote.
Russian citizens made their choice. According to this decision, I signed a decree ordering to promulgate the Constitution with adopted amendments. The amendments come into force. They come into force without overstating it at the people's will. The results have shown a high level of society's unification when it comes to the key questions of national importance. In this connection, I address the government, heads of the regions and lawmakers. The priorities and values that our citizens voted for should be implemented entirely.
This Friday, July 3rd, supporters of Julian Assange are holding a global vigil to celebrate the 49th birthday of the founder of WikiLeaks and revive calls for his release. Assange is awaiting the outcome of an extradition trial to the United States in a UK prison. In this context, the network of intellectuals, artists and social movements in defence of humanity published an open letter demanding his release and insisting on respect for due process while rejecting attempts to extradite him. Meanwhile, Julian's mother, Christine Assange, said on Twitter that the best birthday gift that could be given to her son would be for every voter to call on their parliamentary representative to act to end this brutal persecution against the journalist. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said Friday she was keen for a quick agreement on a recovery fund aimed at pulling the European Union out of the coronavirus recession, arguing that every day counts.
Our common goal is to reach an agreement on European Union budgeting as soon as possible, perhaps even more before the summer break. However, I also say that the road is stony and a lot of goodwill and readiness to compromise for all sides will be required to achieve our aim. But in view of the current economic development, time is pressing and every day counts. The situation is exceptional, so it requires an exceptional effort. And working for an economically and socially strong and united Europe is also a decisive political instrument against populists, against anti-democratic forces, radical and authoritarian movements.
The European Commission temporarily authorised the sale of the antiviral drug remdesivir for the treatment of COVID-19 patients. According to Stella Kyriakidis, European Union Health Commissioner, the authorization on Friday of the first drug to treat COVID-19 is a major step forward in the fight against the disease. The decision comes 1 week after the European Drug Agency approved remdesivir for the treatment of patients over 12 years old with pneumonia and in need of supplemental oxygen. The drug, which was initially developed to treat Ebola, is one of two that have shown to be effective against the novel coronavirus. Remdesivir was previously approved for use in the United States, Japan and South Korea. The United Nations held its first open debate on the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on global peace and security via a video link on Thursday. Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said during the conference that 180 members plus non-member observer states have endorsed his call for a global ceasefire.
The COVID-19 pandemic continues to profoundly affect peace and security across the globe. The consequences can be seen even in a number of countries traditionally seen as stable. But the impacts are particularly apparent in countries already experiencing conflict or emerging from it, and may soon engulf others.
During the UN debate on the COVID-19 pandemic, the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Peter Maurer, stressed that the novel coronavirus aftershock will deepen humanitarian needs and directly impact on violence and conflicts across the globe.
COVID-19 and its economic aftershock are deepening fragility, spiking humanitarian needs, accentuating the impact of violence and conflict, opening the doors to alarming levels of stigmatization, increasing global poverty, heightening instability and tensions, and reversing hard-won development gains. It is clear that pandemics cannot be addressed solely as a health issue. Instead, the precondition is a political environment which supports health systems, social supports, and humanitarian action, simultaneous emergency and development approaches, as well as fundamental change of behavior of belligerents in conflict.
Leader of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Kim Jong-un, met with his ruling Workers' Party's political bureau on Thursday and highlighted the success of the country's efforts against the coronavirus outbreak. North Korea closed its borders in late January as the virus spread in neighbouring China and imposed tough restrictions that put thousands of people into isolation. During the meeting, the North Korean leader cautioned against any self-complacency or relaxation and called for stricter anti-epidemic efforts as reinfection and re-expansion of the disease persist in neighbouring countries. More than 20 countries have welcomed the adoption of the law on safeguarding national security in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region by China's top legislature during the 44th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council. The total number of countries who support China's adoption of a Hong Kong-related law has risen to more than 70. During Wednesday and Thursday's UN sessions, the representative of Russia firmly supported China's implementation of the one country, two systems principle, saying that Hong Kong affairs are entirely China's internal affairs. North Korea, Venezuela and Cameroon also voiced firm opposition to the use of Hong Kong or Xinjiang to interfere in China's internal affairs. Meanwhile, representatives from Ethiopia, Ivory Coast and Madagascar said that the UN Human Rights Council should follow the principles of objectivity, impartiality, depoliticization and non-selectivity in order not to politicize or adopt double standards on human rights issues. Thailand's main international airport unveiled rapid coronavirus tests on Friday for some overseas arrivals after a 3-month ban on foreign visitors was partially lifted this month. Thailand is allowing in some groups of foreigners after more than 5 weeks with no recorded local community transmission of the virus. Business travellers, diplomats and government guests staying for less than 14 days are considered fast-track travellers who will be swab tested for the virus on arrival at the airport to ensure they are infection-free before entry. An official of Thailand's Disease Control Department explained that the test takes around an hour and a half and costs $96. The government is considering a plan to open more international travel through arrangements with some other countries in September, according to a spokesman for the task force on the disease. We have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. As a second wave of locusts threatens to consume East African crops, scientists in a Nairobi lab are experimenting with new ways to kill the insects. According to experts, the current swarms are the worst for 3 generations, encouraged by unseasonably wet weather and spread by a record number of cyclones. According to the World Bank, the destructive pests could cost East Africa and Yemen $8.5 billion this year. Locusts are usually controlled by spraying them with pesticides before they can fly, but the chemicals can harm other insects and the environment. For that reason, scientists at Kenya's International Centre of Insect Physiology and Ecology are experimenting with biopesticides and the use of locusts as human and animal food as they seek environmentally friendly extermination methods.
Where the locust swarms are actually prevailing, a lot of people are eating them. So we think with this background, we think it's something to promote so that a lot more people should engage in this practice rather than shying away thinking that it is a primitive man's food.
In South Africa, the Nasrec Expo Centre in Johannesburg is now a quarantine and isolation facility for people who have tested positive for COVID-19 and have no place to self-isolate. Patients are referred to the centre by a doctor so as not to infect their family members at home. According to a member of the Executive Committee for Health, Bandil Masuku, most of the cases are stable patients who don't require much medical intervention except observation. Masuku added that the centre is preparing for an increase in cases and putting up extra hospital beds for patients that will require further intervention. South Africa has now reported more than 168,000 coronavirus cases, the highest number on the African continent.
Patients who are here are patients that in essence don't require much medical intervention except observations that will be done in the morning in terms of temperature and also other vital signs. So in these types of facilities, it's only very much stable actual patients. But we are not ruling out the fact that we might have to at some point escalate the service, as we are putting up extra hospital beds for patients that will be requiring intervention. It might mean that if the numbers increase, we might need to increase the capacity here.
Myanmar authorities have reported over 160 fatalities from a landslide at a jade mine as the search efforts continue for a second day. A heap of mining waste collapsed into a lake on Thursday and buried many workers under the mud and water. A local official from the Information Ministry reported on Friday that the death toll so far was 161, while 43 people remain hospitalized. According to the official, half of the victims are yet to be identified, and there were many migrants living in a small tent beside the mine. A ceremony to deliver financial aid for the families of the victims was set to be held on Friday, according to local authorities. This Friday, 41 people were injured in explosions at a fireworks factory in northwestern Turkey. Local TV images showed a dark grey plume of smoke billowing from the factory in the district of Hendik in Sakarya province. Provincial Governor Seting Okay Kaldirim reported on his Twitter account that no one had been killed in the explosion. The Turkish Disaster and Emergency Management Authority said the incident was an industrial accident but did not give further details. Dozens of firefighters and rescue workers were sent to the scene following the first explosion. The factory has been the site of 3 separate explosions in 2009, 2011 and 2014 when one person was killed. More than 80 people have been killed in unrest in Ethiopia after a popular singer was shot dead this week. Hakalu Hundessa was buried on Thursday amid tight security. Hundessa had been a prominent voice in anti-government protests that led to a change in leadership in 2018. Angry protests, including 3 bomb blasts, followed his death on Monday in the capital, Addis Ababa. The unrest poses a major challenge for Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who took power in 2018 and introduced sweeping political reforms, for which he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize last year. The singer's killing has further increased tensions after the government recently postponed the general election due to the coronavirus pandemic. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.